Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 5 of what we have been calling Learning Outside the Lines with Kyle and Glenn, or Glenn and Kyle. Again, the order doesn't matter. We're real excited. Glenn, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Excited because our guest today is going to be Dr. Jennifer Dail. She's
the amazing
professor.
Dr. Jennifer Dail.
Yep. Me and Glenn were blessed to both have her as a professor at one point in our own lives. She's an English education professor at Kennesaw State University, and she's going to be talking about how you're engaging students authentically and the difference really between online teaching and remote teaching. I think is going to be really valuable for people who may be listening, and she's been doing this type of work for years now. So with that little tease right there, let's jump into the rest of it. Glenn, what can you share with us with your anecdote today?
So just really cool, keep going back to podcasting because that's where I am right now with students, but they started posting their introductions yesterday. And one of my favorite things about doing with Anchor is just going in and listening to their podcasts. It's a totally different experience when you're kind of evaluating work or kind of checking in to see where they're at in the process. Because I love being able to actually use the application to send them back messages. So I follow their podcast with my podcast, and then I just send them back messages, complimenting their use of different tools, maybe making a couple suggestions or really just giving them props for trying it out. I'm kind of gauging where they're at based on the things that I'm hearing. Another really cool thing happened, sorry, I've got 2 today, is we're doing leprechaun traps in my mythology class. And so I had to transition that real class to digital. And for the leprechaun traps, I gave them the option of creating them in Minecraft. And one of my students just used something that was very research-based. They actually made little signs for the leprechaun to like bait the leprechaun further and further. And then there was definitely more TNT than I've ever seen. Like it was pretty, I think the leprechaun's dead.
Was it explosive?
It was highly explosive.
I think one of the things that you hit on right there that's really important, though, is the feedback you're trying to give to students. Mm-hmm. I think if there's any value we can bring to learning right now when we're in this strange space is the feedback we can provide students, both as reassurances, as a caring space, but also just to be like, hey, I'm paying attention, right? Like I care about what you're making and what you're doing and how you're learning,
Exactly. And
I love that actually, that.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things I'm going to be talking about today with the digital teaching hack. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into that, there's one thing I want to share with you. One of the things that has happened recently, and you've probably maybe even seen it on the news, is they're really asking for any way to get hands on PPE gear right now for hospitals and doctors and those on the front lines. So our own health science classrooms have gotten in on that recently in our district, and we have a quick video I want to share of students at Duluth High School who are actually creating masks from their homes, sewing them together, and then sending them to our local hospital.
Let's check this out.
See if I can get this to, here we go. All right. So you should hopefully see the video. It's a real quick one. What the final product looks like. So anyway, I thought that was a wonderful thing to share. Some of the really cool things that humans are doing, especially in a strange time, just to support and do great things for one another. I thought that was pretty uplifting.
Definitely uplifting.
All right, so let's get into our online teaching hack of the day.
So one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about is feedback. And this is actually some words from a student at Linear High School who was asked in a survey, kind of like, what are some things that they're receiving from their teachers? How can we make digital learning better? What are some of your experiences like? And this is kind of a longer response, but this is some of the things that they said, just to highlight some of that here. just talking about how they were able to finish their assignments on time, even though they had internet issues. It talks about a really complex social media Twister assignment where they were confused about how to do screenshots of Twitter, but they had to figure it out on their own. And then they were talking about taking breaks, limiting their screen time, trying to make it not so overwhelming, and just being mindful of, kind of measuring out their day. They talk about how their teachers could have been more flexible with giving them feedback as soon as they submitted a completed assignment, so that they knew if what they did was right. Like, especially if it's an assignment that if they're being asked to do it multiple times, if we don't give them that feedback, as soon as possible, then how do they know after multiple iterations, or if they're doing something right, or are they just continuing to make the same mistakes because they're not getting that feedback? And that kind of gets me into an article by Edutopia, which I had a really great mentor and friend, Brooke Webb from Lanier High School, actually posted this out on Facebook. So thanks, Brooke. But this is from Edutopia about 5 research-based tips for providing students with meaningful feedback. And these are all things that we've probably thought about in the classroom, but now that we've moved into these digital spaces, this becomes even more important. So just being as specific as possible, providing feedback, again, that kind of echoes exactly the words of that student we just read, the sooner the better. And addressing learners' advancement toward a goal. So actually having a goal in mind with our assessments and then providing them feedback as to where they are in terms of meeting that target. And then being careful with the words that we have. I keep thinking back to that conversation we had with Jackson Pierce last night about making sure that we don't teach our students that they're bad writers. Right. That's not what we're trying to do. So be careful with our words. And then I love number 5 here. And I think this is so important, especially with collaboration, is just involving learners in that process. And this provides some great tips on how to do that. And we'll link this for you guys, but this is just from Edutopia, 5 research-based strategies for providing student feedback.
Yeah. I mean, all good pointers when it comes to bringing feedback, particularly when you were just mentioning again what Jackson talked about with, we don't want to turn kids into believing or that their identity is a bad writer. Right?
Yeah.
That's huge. All right. So we're going to move now into what's the good word. So this is our segment where we bring in our special guest. So today, Dr. Jennifer Dail is joining us from Kennesaw State University. We are really excited to have her. I'm going to pull her into the conversation right now. All right, there you are.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I just appeared out of nowhere.
Well, I mean, in a way you did, I mean, that's the magic of of online, I suppose, at Zoom. Well, we wanted to bring you on, and we had this discussion right before we got on. We're definitely going to talk about engaging students and learners authentically online, but you brought up a really good point about there's something going on right now that we're not necessarily addressing. So we'd love for you to talk about what's kind of going on with the stop behind online learning versus remote learning and the triage that's happening right now with teachers.
Well, you just used all my words right there.
I know, but you get to use them again. I'm learning. I'm still learning from you.
So it might help if I backpedal 5.5 years ago. I was in a class as a faculty member at KSU learning how to take and make courses that are typically face-to-face to be delivered online, and building my first online course. Building it, not putting it together in a week. Building it took an entire semester, and then we were still allowed time after that. So to the point there is that online teaching, and I've seen a lot of comments in the different forums I'm on in the past couple of weeks saying, wow, it's so much more work than face-to-face teaching. I don't know if it's more work, it's different work. And it's certainly a lot of front loading. And the sort of thinking that you have to put into building a course online is different, because what we do in a face-to-face classroom cannot directly translate into an online space, where faculty members at universities and teachers like you two and public schools right now and students are finding themselves is what I would call a remote learning situation, that we're triaging a really unprecedented event and moment in history that we've not been shown how to navigate culturally or professionally, and we are making learning remote. I just want to be sure that we don't confuse the difference between online learning and remote learning. And I think that the idea of remote learning and what I'm seeing teachers like y'all do with students in the classroom offers some amazing possibilities for what teaching might look like when you all go back together in a physical space, and ways to think about better including students who maybe have to miss some days of school for whatever reasons, or creating a more flexible curriculum and things like that, so that maybe when we say we feel constrained by the bell, the 50-minute bell or the block scheduled bell, that this might help us conceptualize of broadening the classroom space in K-12 education.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the exact term, but I do feel like crisis is kind of the mother of invention, right? We're really forced in this situation to start rethinking what our spaces are like in a classroom and outside of it. It's so interesting to me in terms of thinking about what positive pieces are going to come out of this experience. Oh, yeah. I don't want to downplay how tragic some of this is, for sure. But like Glenn, thinking about how it's already advancing the way you'll do things in your classroom, right?
Yeah, just the whole process of establishing new community norms was huge. And it's something that's really made me like reflect, like, why don't we do this more often? Like, we're definitely not the same people we were when we started the year, but if this wouldn't have happened, we probably would have just kept going pretending we were. And
the same people we were a month ago, Glenn.
Right? I know, exactly. And like, why am I not providing my students more of themselves in the classroom space? Like, you know, using podcasts as a tool to actually journal and talk about their lives. Like, yeah, that was important before this happened. You know, it's not like it just suddenly got important. It's in our faces now. But yeah, there's a lot of positive that comes out of this if we learn, you know. Right. And I think you're right. It's about bringing it back to the classroom. But thanks for the definite differentiation there between the two different categories about learning.
So Dr. Dail, we also...
That's my differentiation. I may have colleagues who don't agree with that differentiation.
Sure. I still think it's, and it's important to recognize that, but I think you're lending voice to something that needs to be heard. We also really wanted to ask you about and engage you in talking about, you've been doing this for 5 years. How are you keeping engagement among students, college or otherwise, engage authentically in their learning when you're hundreds of miles apart in some cases?
Yeah. So I'll backpedal again to answer. 5 years. I never wanted to teach online. I mean, I'm no different than y'all, man. When I went into teaching, it's because I liked interacting with students in certain capacities and in certain ways, right? And I felt like something would be lost moving online, and that was engagement. And I really struggled, as someone whose background is in curriculum and instruction in pedagogy. I really struggled with how do we replicate or maintain what we value in a face-to-face classroom moving into an online space. And like I said before, we cannot expect to replicate that. I think that, so one thing I've learned over the years is, and I got frustrated with this very early on, when students wouldn't reply to emails or like do things just to let you know that they're out there, because it's like sending the barbaric yawp out into the woods and hearing nothing back, and you don't know if anyone heard your barbaric yawp, and Dead Poet Society reference for anyone who's not as old as me. So anyway, I went through a phase very early on in my online teaching where I'd be like, you have to reply and let me know you received the email. Well, we can easily fall into these administrative rabbit holes where we create more work that isn't about the teaching, right? And it's just about checking off boxes. Yes, Kyle got the email. Yes, Glenn got the email. And that's not what I want my teaching to look like. And so when I stepped back and I thought about it, there are students, even in the face-to-face classroom, who aren't participating. Maybe they've got their head down on the desk. Maybe they're surfing on their phone or doing something for another class, and they're not participating. I think it doesn't feel the same way because you still have other people in the same space who are actively engaging. Mm-hmm. And so I learned that I had to give myself permission. That just like a face-to-face class, there's going to be some kids who are just jumping through the hoops and don't care to engage.
Okay.
So if I can give myself permission there and sort of, that doesn't mean I don't try to engage those students.
Yeah.
But if I can allow that engagement's not going to look the same for everybody, that makes it feel even better when it's good. And so I'll just tell a couple things I do. I used to do, we often get told that when we go online, the best way to do discussions, just a discussion board. And I find those super duper unwieldy. I personally am not a threaded reader. I'm not a linear thinker necessarily. Things can get buried in a thread too and be hard and clunky to find, and the students were giving the same feedback. So I moved my discussions to Flipgrid, and most teachers at this point are familiar with Flipgrid, but it lets you record video and share and, hold on, I'm gonna try to share my screen, watch the online teacher fail at this epically or something.
You're doing great.
Well, it gets covered a bit. So you can see, like here, I put my lecture up here for my class, and I put the prompts that I wanted them to respond to, and then they did responses, and they responded to each other. You can see there's some video responses where they went in and responded to each other. Sometimes I require that, sometimes I do not. It feels really artificial, so I'm not the biggest fan of requiring it, but it can be good early in the semester to at least get them used to going back in and replying and trying to build that culture. Something else I've realized too is what happens in a face-to-face classroom space when we have discussion is the teacher's often interjecting and doing these summarizing moves and restatement of points. Students aren't going back and viewing everybody's, and they're not looking for the synthesis or the summary. So, and this speaks to your point about feedback earlier too. Even in a discussion, students want to know if they're getting the point, but it's also really artificial again in a face-to-face discussion to be like, good job, Glenn, you got an A. That, you know, that's not really how it works. So I tell students, if you're missing the mark, I'm going to let you know. And there's a quick rubric that I can fill out and send to them, and they know they got their full points. And I don't have to be like, you gave great contributions and you said blah, 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 because that was getting really tedious too. So what I started doing is creating, like I said, I'm not a linear thinker. So I would listen to their discussions and create these sort of mind mapping notes that gave a synopsis. And then I just scan them as a PDF. It's a different format. They seem to enjoy it when they give me feedback. It's a different visual format for them to read, and it summarizes the key things they brought up in discussions, the questions they asked, and points them towards resources and starts to pose questions to push their thinking or try to provide them with some answers. Oh, I don't want a new share. That would be incorrect. I mean, most of us know about VoiceThread 2. You can accomplish a lot of the same things, but something else I do, and I've seen a lot of instructors complain about the email glut that goes with online teaching because we're not all in the same space. So if Kyle asks the question and Glenn doesn't know Kyle asked the question, and then you're getting like 30 emails with the same question. So I teach my students the difference between a question that needs a personal answer and an administrative class level question that everybody's probably going to benefit from. And I create a muddiest point chart, and they come and they write their questions here, and they can respond to each other. No one in this class has, because I've gotten in there first. I check it every 24 hours and I type the response and the answer over here. So it's public to everybody. And then that cuts down on multiple emails asking the same question. You can see A lot of these, like, hey guys, how do you add the group annotation with comments in a Google Doc? A lot of these are administrative level questions just about how to accomplish what I'm asking them to accomplish. When we submit the final draft of Project A, will there be a new folder? You know, just these are things that everyone's going to have a question about. It also tells me as a teacher where I might clarify my instructions. So that's useful if you read it in that vein as well. And then one other thing I was going to share with you, I tell students when they can expect to hear from me, like when they can expect work to be posted, when their work is due, and work is always open. I always open up the next week on Friday, and their work is always due on Sunday night. So there's a little bit of overlap there, right? But they know. And so it only takes a couple weeks to figure out the cycle. And I'm not playing a game by changing it up on them. They know that by 5 p.m. every Thursday, they're going to get an email with feedback from me. So you can, like, I tell them what attachments are in the email. I make the beginning of my email really conversational. Like earlier this semester when I was training for my half marathon, I would talk about my training runs. Well, now I'm talking about COVID-19 and social distancing. And I've been attaching, I've started since we've gone we were already online, but since they've all gone online with their students and we're just in this new space we're navigating culturally, I've started attaching a poem each week for them that they just, to lift their spirits. I try to make sure it has something to do with just getting through tough times and a really positive outlook. I always tell them how to know exactly where they stand in the class. So this is just a copy and paste template, right? And then I used to just write paragraphs. I have learned that using headings like a paper directs them as a reader. I can give them resources. I do a form at the end of every module, a Google form, and they get to ask any questions. And this is where I can answer those questions collectively if it'll benefit the whole class, or I can send them a private email and be like, hey, you were inquiring about this, let me clarify it for you. And then I give them a looking ahead preview just to redirect them to we're still moving forward. So I have learned that structuring emails in a very consistent and specific way is really helpful to students. And again, I think it's all about being routine and consistent and letting them know what to expect from you.
Yeah, that's huge. We've talked a little bit before in previous episodes about routine. You know, with me and Glenn both having young kiddos ourselves, I mean, that's a big part of what we're trying to do is establish routines that are different than what they had before. You know, they're not going into their their classroom space with their teachers right now.
Yeah, we can't replicate exactly like what you were saying. And I like the poem aspect too. That kind of reminds me of what Bobby Gway said yesterday about just putting out positive vibes and continuing to be that source of positivity right now.
Yeah. And I created a flip grid just called Connecting since we've all socially distanced, and almost like Insta stories where we can just sort of post what we're thinking and feeling. I'm the only one who's posted, but it's only been up for a week and a half, but they're viewing it. And Flipgrid shows me that they're viewing it. So, and I would encourage people too, that when you go to video formats, not everybody is comfortable being seen like this. Mm-hmm. And so allow them to just post a picture of themselves or their pet or their stuffed animal or something to represent themselves if they're not comfortable in this way.
Like that.
That'll encourage them to engage more.
I'm getting a lot of gems. Like
I was about to say, there's a lot to steal here. That's why we wanted to have you come on.
Well, but there's a lot of value in being seen, and it's building up comfort level, right? And maybe even assuring them that their hair doesn't have to be perfect. Y'all been in my class. Y'all know if I need to get a video out and I've just gone for a run, but my deadline's to get that video out that day, you're going to get workout Dail, and that's a whole head wrap and everything else going on. But it's important that they see that we're human too. So giving them permission not to be seen, but also letting them see you and getting comfortable with that. They need to see us coming through the screen. Anytime you introduce a concept, if you can just take, even if it's 2 to 3 minutes, and do a quick screencast, like I use Screencast-O-Matic. The free version cuts you off at 15 minutes. Nobody needs to listen to me for more than 15 minutes anyway, so that's okay. And but walking them through instead of just assuming that they can read it and get it.
Yeah.
They need to see us, they need to hear us, and that helps them feel more connected. And even if they're not picking up what we're putting down in terms of like being willing to reciprocate, they do in feedback say that made a world of difference.
Yeah. Modeling is still important right now, so modeling the thinking that you have as an instructor, or the thinking you have about a piece that's being read, or that you're trying, or a problem you're trying to understand and find a solution for, still really, really important.
It also helps us sound more human than just directional words on a page, which can sound really dry.
Definitely. Yeah. I think modeling is probably more important now than ever. So, a lot of these things that were important just got magnified.
Yeah. Well, if you want to hang out with us, go ahead.
Or maybe we're realizing some of the crap and hoops we're doing as educators don't matter as much and aren't as important.
Reprioritize.
So drop that there for thought.
Thank you.
All right. We'll hashtag truth that one. Glenn, if it's okay with you, I'm going to have you actually do the outro solo. I'll say what I was going to share, just because we had such a great conversation with Dr. Dail too. So I'm really excited about what you have to share. So as we close out, so if you'll hang tight with us, Glenn, take it, man. What do we get to look forward to?
All right. So this is really exciting. Little bit that was just shared around on YouTube. But I don't know if you've seen this, but Christopher Walken reading Where the Wild Things Are. Okay, now a little bit of a disclaimer here. He actually narrates the pictures as well. So depending on how you feel about your young ears that might be listening to this, there are some mentions, and he's just narrating what's shown. He definitely brings some new light to Maurice Sendak here.
Grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And then you can see him dancing around and there's some kind of bugs on the earth. But oh, no, that's flowers. I don't know why they have bug ears. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through night and day. He's in a boat. He looks pleased with himself. He looks very happy to be there. There's another tree out in the middle of the water. I don't know why.
Here's the part that's got the...
Nailing a cloth into the wall, and there's a bear strung up. I assume murdered.
So he goes on a little bit about that poor bear. But it's definitely... highly enjoyable, maybe for your young ears in the house, I don't know, but for our sanity and for uplifting us right now, Christopher Walken can definitely do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again for our Learning Outside the Lines, and we look forward to keeping this up as long as you want to watch it and you want to see it. So in the meantime, you can connect with me on Twitter at @theprofjones.
And I'm at gchant668.
And I'm can I say where I am? I'm at Jennifer_S_Dail, DAIL.
Awesome. Connect with all three of us, please. See you out there in the cyber universe.